Welcome to Crime Maze. In this video we are going to talk about the 5 murders solved 20 years later. So before starting this video, like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel Crime Maze for future updates. Cold cases are the subject of some of the most popular TV dramas, movies, and documentaries in the world, especially the U.S. All of the cold cases on this list occurred in the United States and remained unresolved for decades. New technology discovered new evidence that might be used to make arrests and convictions in the majority of these cases. While all of these cold cases were officially solved, justice was not always served because the suspects had already died and too much time had elapsed. Hopefully, knowing who took their loved ones away may bring some relief to the victims' families. Detectives are frequently shown as intelligent, talented individuals. They have the uncommon ability to perceive things that ordinary people cannot. That ability, however, has a means. The word detective means to discover the truth, and it refers to detecting both the possible and the improbable, to gain a deeper understanding of how and why people behave. Finally, get rid of the impossibility. Police in Pennsylvania reported that a 57-year-old cold case involving the violent sexual assault and murder of a 9-year-old girl was solved using genetic genealogy. Maris and Chivarella was slain on March 18, 1964. According to a press release issued by state police on Tuesday, she was on her way to school, delivering canned food to a church, but she never returned to her Hazleton home. James Paul Forte, her assailant, was recognized by authorities on Thursday. At a news conference in May 1980, authorities reported he died of natural causes, possibly a heart attack. "This is a watershed moment for our department," said Col. Mark Barron, the case's main investigator. Here are the 5 killings that have been solved 20 years later. Number 5. Murder of Wendy Jo Hallison. Wendy Jo Hallison, a 22-year-old art student, went missing in 1968 from a thrifty drugstore near Wilshire Boulevard and Fairfax Avenue, and her family has been searching for answers for nearly 5 decades. When DNA evidence linked a convicted murderer who died in an Ohio prison in 2013 to the homicide in 2016, they finally got answers. Hallison, who attended San Fernando Valley State College, now California State University, Northridge, and lived with her family on Stearns Drive south of Carthay Square, had gone shopping at the now-defunct thrifty store on September 29, 1968. Friends and family discovered the victim's Ford Thunderbird parked on Fairfax Avenue near Olympic Boulevard, just south of the business. The next day, according to Det. Richard Bengtson of the Los Angeles Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division, Hallison's body was found in the trunk. Detectives from the Wilshire Division, according to Bengtson, worked on the case for years. They assumed one of the men in Hallison's life was responsible for his death. She had a boyfriend and an ex-boyfriend at the time, both of whom she kept in touch with. Hallison was strangled, a technique of murder so personal that investigators suspected the perpetrator knew the deceased and had a hatred against him. However, the evidence never came together, and no charges were filed. The case went cold for years until being resurrected by Robbery Homicide Division officers years later. In the late 1990s, DNA technology evolved dramatically, and police were able to analyze evidence from the Hallison murder before he was assigned to the case. According to Bengtson, Hallison had also been sexually abused. According to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, he added that sperm and other evidence from the site were first examined in 1998, and then again in 2000, with no positive results. In 2009, the evidence was analyzed once more as DNA technology evolved. The results were not conclusive enough to identify a criminal, but they did rule out the first candidates. Authorities remained hopeful, according to Bengtson, who worked on the case with reserve officer and retired Deputy District Attorney Peter Berman, that technology would someday advance enough to identify Hallison's killer. The evidence was analyzed again last year and was matched to Edwin Dean Richardson, a convicted felon with an extensive criminal record including robbery, murder, and other offenses. Richardson, who was characterized by investigators as a vagrant, died in 2013 at the age of 77 while serving life in an Ohio jail for a 1977 murder. Richardson was staying in the vicinity when he killed Hallison, according to Bengtson. The suspect's mother, according to the detective, lived in the Mid-City neighborhood. Richardson also fit the description of a white male seen in the store at the same time Hallison was there. According to witnesses, Richardson, according to Bengtson, followed Hallison to the parking lot. Richardson was described as a predator, and the murder was described as a crime of opportunity. According to him, Richardson was convicted of the 1972 murder of a 23-year-old woman in Orange County and sentenced to life in prison after his murder conviction in Ohio. If he ever got out of prison in Ohio, he would have been transferred to California's custody. According to Bengtson, Hallison may not have been the only lady murdered in the area by Richardson, who was a suspect in 4 other instances. Margaret Schuett, a woman in her early 20s who vanished from the same thrifty drug shop in 1969 and was later discovered in Burbank, is one of the victims. The DNA evidence from the investigation was lost, according to Bengtson, and the case remains unsolved. He stated that he is only now beginning to look at the other incidents. The detective said it was satisfying to link Richardson to Hallison's murder since it brought answers to the victim's family. In an article published on August 26, the Los Angeles Times reported that the case had been solved. According to Bengtson, Hallison's family gave the newspaper the information a year after the DNA match was made. Number 4. Murder of Susan Galvin. Susan Galvin's murder is another cold case that was recently solved thanks to current genealogical databases and the use of old DNA. In July 1967, Galvin was found raped and murdered in a parking garage, and there was only one suspect. For decades, the lone suspect was a professional clown who had been spotted with Galvin just days before she was discovered. Due to a lack of evidence, the clown was never charged, and in 2016, the clown was finally cleared by a DNA test. During the summer of 2019, investigators sent the killer's DNA to Parabon Nanolabs in Reston, Virginia, which they had collected decades before. A family tree for the killer was established using information from a genealogical database, and he was eventually identified as Frank Wypych, despite the fact that Galvin's case was solved. There will never be full justice for her murder, because Wypych died in 1987. Investigators are now investigating whether Frank Wypych, who was in the Army at the time, killed anyone else while stationed in New York, Alaska, and Germany. Number 3. Murder of Everett Delano. The case of Everett Delano's murder was declared solved and ended in February 2019, despite the fact that no one was ever convicted. In 1966, Delano, a Navy veteran, was shot 3 times in the head while working for a buddy at Sanborn's garage. Delano survived the accident but died the next day in the hospital. Fingerprints were recovered from the scene, but no suspect or murder weapon were ever found until the case was revived in 2013. Thomas Cass, a career criminal, was the subject of the fingerprints obtained all those years ago. Cass was questioned 3 times before committing suicide in early 2014. You never talk about something that has no statute of limitations. Cass warned the woman who lived with him at the time of his death. Cass was considered the murderer based on this confession, the fingerprints, and Cass' suicide. Because the prosecutor's office was short-staffed, it took several years for Everett Delano's case to be legally concluded after Thomas Cass' suicide. Number 2. Murder of Margaret Peggy Beck. The cold case of Margaret Peggy Beck's assassination in Colorado was recently solved thanks to genealogical testing. Law authorities in Jefferson County reported in late April 2020 that they knew who sexually assaulted and killed Beck in 1963. They haven't been able to locate the suspect, James Raymond Taylor, and aren't sure if he's still alive. Taylor's family has worked with authorities, but they claim they haven't seen him since the 1970s. In 1976, his last known address was in Las Vegas. Taylor's whereabouts are still unknown, but Beck's 3 living sisters remain hopeful. After running a full DNA profile created from Margaret Beck's fingernail scrapings from 1963 through a genealogical research database, investigators were able to identify James Raymond Taylor. Number 1. Murder of Irene Garza. Until Father John Bernard Fite was convicted in 2017, the murder of beauty queen Irene Garza remained a mystery. As a result, Irene Garza's murder is the world's oldest unsolved cold case. Garza was last seen alive on April 16, 1960, and was reported missing the next morning after failing to return home after attending church confession. On April 21, a huge volunteer search was undertaken, and Garza's body was discovered a few days later. The priest who heard Garza's confession, Father John Bernard Fite, was the sole person named as a suspect in her death. Fite was never convicted due to a lack of evidence, and the case remained unresolved for decades. Fight confessed to murdering a woman in the 1960s. According to two pastors, Dale Tacheny and Joseph O'Brien, despite the new evidence, Garza's case was not revisited for another decade, and Fight was not convicted until 2017. Fight passed away on February 12, 2020, from natural causes while jailed. What do you think about this video? Do let us know down in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear from us again, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go.